E. It started the moment I opened the door. I wasn't expecting him, and I certainly wasn't prepared for what came next. My father's best friend, someone I'd known my entire life, stood there with a look in his eyes I couldn't quite place. It wasn't his usual smile or his casual charm. This was different, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Hey, is your dad home?" he asked, but his tone didn't match the words. It was deeper, more deliberate. "No, he's out for the evening," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew better. As he walked past me, I caught a whiff of his cologne, woodsy, masculine, and far too alluring. I shook the thought from my head. This was my dad's best friend, for heaven's sake. But even as I tried to convince myself, I felt the weight of his gaze lingering on me. He settled into the couch, his broad shoulders dominating the space. I offered him something to drink, trying to mask my unease with politeness. When I handed him the glass of water, our fingers brushed. It was the lightest touch, but it felt like an electric current shooting through me. "You've grown up a lot," he said, his eyes locking onto mine in a way that made my heart race. The words were innocent enough, but the way he said them, there was no mistaking his intent. I laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Thanks, I guess. It's been a while since we've seen each other." "Too long," he murmured, his gaze never wavering. The silence stretched between us, thick and oppressive. I could feel my pulse quicken, my body betraying me in a way I couldn't control. Trying to break the tension, I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, keeping a safe distance. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But the way he shifted, angling his body toward mine, made it clear that space wouldn't be enough to dampen the electricity crackling between us. "So, what brings you by?" I asked, hoping to steer the conversation into safer territory. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his voice low and smooth. "Make sure everything's okay." "Everything's fine," I replied quickly, maybe too quickly. The corners of his mouth twitched, as if he could see right through me. "My dad will probably be back soon, though," I added, though I knew it wasn't true. He leaned back, resting one arm along the back of the couch. "I'm not in any rush." My heart thudded in my chest. I knew I should say something, do something to diffuse whatever this was, but I was frozen, caught between wanting to push him away and wanting to see how far he'd go. "You know," he began, his voice taking on a contemplative tone, "I've always thought you were special. Even when you were younger, there was something about you, different from everyone else." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. His words were walking a fine line, and the way he was looking at me, it was like he was daring me to acknowledge it. "That's nice of you to say," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into mine. "It's not just nice. It's the truth. You're incredible, and I don't think anyone's ever told you that the way you deserve to hear it." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The intensity of his gaze, the sincerity in his voice, it was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to run, but another part, a stronger, more reckless part, wanted to stay. I should check on something," I said abruptly, standing up and breaking the spell. I needed a moment to collect myself, to breathe. But as I turned to walk away, his hand caught mine, stopping me in my tracks. "Wait," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Don't go." I looked down at his hand, then back up at him. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. My mind was screaming at me to pull away, but my body refused to listen. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. "I just want to talk. It's not fear. I replied, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. It's complicated. Complicated doesn't mean impossible, he said, his words laced with meaning. Sometimes the things we think are too complicated are the ones we need to confront the most. I let out a shaky breath, my resolve weakening with every passing second. This isn't right. You know that. He stood then, his presence looming but not overbearing. He moved closer, slowly, giving me every opportunity to step away. But I didn't. Right and wrong aren't always as clear as we'd like them to be, he said softly. Sometimes we just have to trust what we feel. And what do you feel? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. My voice was barely audible, but I knew he heard me. His answer was immediate, his gaze steady. That this moment was inevitable, that I've been waiting for it without even realizing it. I felt my knees weaken as his words washed over me. This was madness. Pure madness. And yet, I couldn't deny the truth in his eyes, the way they seemed to reflect everything I was too afraid to say. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek with a tenderness that left me breathless. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice a mixture of pleading and restraint. "And I will." But I didn't. I couldn't. My silence was the only answer he needed. Slowly, he closed the distance between us, his intentions clear but unhurried, giving me every chance to change my mind. And in that moment, I realized that some lines, once crossed, could never be redrawn. But perhaps, just perhaps, they were meant to be crossed all along. The days that followed blurred into a haze of emotions, confusion, guilt, and something else I wasn't ready to name. I found myself replaying that night over and over, dissecting every word, every glance, every touch. I told myself it was a mistake, an anomaly, something that would never happen again. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I avoided him at first, inventing excuses to stay away whenever he came around. But it was impossible to avoid someone who seemed to know exactly how to find you. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, I felt his presence before I saw him. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice soft but firm. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. "I've been busy," I replied, my hands trembling as I scrubbed the same plate over and over. He stepped closer, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. "Busy doesn't explain the way you run out of the room the moment I walk in." I set the plate down, gripping the edge of the sink for support. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's not fair?" he asked, his voice closer now. "That I can't stop thinking about you? That every time I close my eyes I see your face? Because if that's unfair, then I don't want fair." I turned to face him, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his words. "You don't understand," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "This could ruin everything. Or it could be the best thing that ever happened to us," he countered, his eyes searching mine for a hint of agreement. "I'm willing to take that risk. Are you?" I hesitated, my mind racing through all the reasons I should say no. But every time I tried to find the words, they caught in my throat. The truth was, I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to push him away. And that terrified me. "What if it doesn't work?" I asked finally, my voice barely audible. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "But I can't go back to pretending. I won't." His honesty cut through my defenses like a knife. There was no pretense, no manipulation, just raw, unfiltered truth. And in that moment, I realized I didn't want to go back either. I didn't want to pretend that nothing had changed when everything had. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The relief in his eyes was immediate, and it was enough to make my heart ache. He reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said softly, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. "No pressure, no expectations, just us." It was a promise, and one I knew he would keep. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges and more moments of doubt. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew one thing for certain. It would be worth it.